though, are not determined. Humanity is the highest person, remains in a relation to God, as evidenced by the fact that each evolving person that is part of it, just like humanity as a whole, may approach God or move away from Him. Karsavin rejects the transcendence view, that is the conviction that the distance between the creation and the absolute cannot be reduced by way of the activity of creating. Yet he enjoys the view that there exists a certain irreducible distance between both, which can be removed solely by the absolute itself in the moment of theosis. How is all this related to human history, to the principles by which it is governed, and history as a science? Historical subjects, whose fates are researched by historians, are collective persons of different ranks. Such persons may be churches, cultures, nations, but most importantly, the superior highest person, namely humanity. The content of history as the proper subject of historical research is the process of its partial actualization. One should then each time write history of humanity anew, and the fact that historians proceed otherwise and choose persons of lower ranks as their subject is partly the result of the limited capabilities of human cognition, and partly of a mistaken conception of the task of history as science. Historiography of the other day understood it better than does the contemporary. In the pre-modern and pre-scientific era, even local chronicles used to begin with a brief recapitulation of the history of the world. A considerable role in Karsavin's consideration of history in both of its meanings is played by the distinction into organic and supraorganic persons. While in Russian philosophy of culture the term organic usually has positive connotations, in Karsavin's thought it acquires a different shape. Yet this is merely a terminological difference. Karsavin's opposition between organic and supraorganic is compatible with the common opposition in Russian philosophy between mechanical and organic. Organic persons are those who are subject to a far-fetched reduction as a result of subordinating their activity to aims imposed on them by external non-personal reality. An example of an organic person may be the working class of Karsavin's era, absorbed completely by material and production issues, and not engaged in creating its own culture, in contrast to its situation in the Middle Ages. The distinction turns out to be useful for describing the regularities governing the evolution of historical subjects. One may speak of its four subsequent phases: a potential or unity, an originally diverse unity, an organic unity, and a systemic unity, which precedes the disintegration of the subject in the course of its struggles with other subjects. A new historical subject is born in the womb of an already existing one, but its emergence cannot be explained in causal terms. It is neither an emanation of the already existing ones, nor the sum of converging influences. Its development, and more specifically, its emergence and evolution, consists in internal differentiation, which initially does not threaten the supraorganic nature of the lower-ranked persons who participate in a given being. Until a certain point, they remain autonomic, multi-dimensional subjects to evolve into specialized organs only at later stages. As one may easily predict, in the first supraorganic phase, an important role in the life of a collective person is played by religion, which loses importance in subsequent phases, but regains for a short while its influence right before the death of the subject. When ruminating upon these ideas, one can hardly avoid associations with Spengler. The passage from supraorganicity to organicity may be easily interpreted in Spengler terms, such as the transformation of a culture into a civilization. For this reason, one should stress that Karsavin was critical of Spengler's opposition between culture and civilization. Civilization, understood as master over nature, the development of technology, etc., is a quality enriching a historical subject. Spiritual values may successfully coexist with it, even if such a harmony has never has never been achieved so far. The fundamental difference between Karsavin's standpoint and cyclical conceptions, which may be easily overlooked when one is misled by superficial similarities, is determined by a strict dependence of Karsavin's historiography on the metaphysics of all unity. In cyclical conceptions, decadence is an unavoidable evil, which we would try to evade if it were possible. In Karsavin's conception, all the moments of a historical process belong to all unity, and hence they are equally indispensable, even though not all of them are equally perfect empirical actualizations. If history is a process of partial actualization of humanity, then a proper metaphor of history would not be a journey, growth and getting old of an organism, but rather a gestalt emerging from darkness to light, yet never evenly lit or perfectly visible. Thus, Karsavin recognizes all the moments of historical process as equally valuable, as long as all of them are indispensable element of fullness, but at the same time he clearly hierarchizes them. All religions, non-Christian included, are justified in their existence. The same pertains to cultures. The Russian thinker appreciates the attempt to go beyond the perspective of the West in historical research, but he sees their fundamental weakness as resting in their inability to merge local perspectives in one universally human. He tries to harmonize, not without success, historiographical pluralism with gradualism and universalism. He does not view historical subjects of different rank as closed monads, but rather as different aspects of one and the same humanity. In this context, an important question concerning the high point in the evolution of a historical subject arises. Every historical subject, no matter how imperfect, at a certain moment approaches the absolute more than in other phases of its evolution, albeit not necessarily as much as it is capable of. At this point, it is in the closest proximity to its timeless, perfect form. The high point of a historical subject, who is always a collective person, is not equal with the high points in the lower rank persons who individualize this subject. These persons develop, grow, and fade away in different rhythms. Hence, it is a misunderstanding to equate the decline of the West with the end of humanity. It is difficult to draw a sharp line between the ontology of historical process just described and the epistemology of historical cognition. Still, Karsavin is aware of the fact that these are two different areas. Transformation of historical subjects or collective persons, involving not only their past but the present and the future, constitute the subject matter of historian. Collective persons, though, that are the focus of history are not directly accessible. A researcher has access only to concrete persons among the many in which collective persons are actualized, and this access is often mediated by sources rather than direct. Yet it is in the specificity of historical cognition that it relies on the intuitive insight which reaches the whole, a historical subject, through a detail. On the one hand, it is possible due to the fact that a detail, as a moment of all unity, being a historical subject, represents the whole. On the other, due to the fact that the researcher themselves participates in this all unity. Every act of historical cognition is essentially self-cognition. The lack of access to all the individualizations of the subject is not as severe a limitation as it might initially seem, because the aim of research is not gathering facts, but capturing the specificity of the processes and collective beings that are being described. The researcher is then fully entitled to complete his narrative with suppositions and even deliberately created fictions, as long as he does not call them facts. This kind of status, for example, is attributed to the ancient leaders' speeches in the works of ancient historiographers. They are not authentic and never passed for such, yet they are not counterfeit but a legitimate means of creating an image of the past. There is no room, however, for causal explanations in historical research. They are excluded by the very structure of historical being, that is, all unity, where borders between subjects are unclear, which makes both their separation from one another and establishing the direction of relations among them impossible. An essential feature of history as science is then imprecision. This, however, does not diminish its status. The findings of historians are of approximate and fragmentary nature because their subject matter is the existing all unity, while the subject matter of sciences is one of its aspects as it happens to be distinguished and prepared by a given science. What sort of knowledge is more reliable? Delivered by a science which does not concern reality, or a discipline that examines reality and provides an approximate and intuitive knowledge. One may elicit from all that has been said certain recommendations for researchers. First of all, there is no reason why one should prioritize the methods of contemporary historiography. According to Karsavin, it is hardly possible to talk about any progress within the methods employed by historians. Rather, a regress may be observed. That is why the works of historians of older times seem more evocative to us than contemporary ones, in particular monographs by multiple authors, so disliked by the thinker. Studying the past as an irrational and intuitive activity is specifically a single author thing. The divergence between different authors' accounts is not evidence of the falseness of some of them, but rather of their complementarity. They are shedding light on different aspects of all unity, which cannot be represented in an exhaustive way. Karsavin, one should note, does not see any codependence between theoretical consciousness and the capacity of gaining a direct, authentic insight into the past. Not only does he claim that it is an impossibility to give a comprehensive account of the theoretical assumption of history as an academic discipline, but he also suggests that it is possible to engage into historical inquiry without having the knowledge about such assumptions. Many historians manage to describe the history of collective persons aptly and insightfully without being aware of the existence of any such assumptions. Meanwhile, it should be taken for granted that following erroneous theoretical assumption is likely to lead a historian astray. Historical research cannot do without value judgment and consequently without any regard to the opposition progress-regress, which according to Karsavin has always been present in our thinking about collective history. Progressivist conception of history is subject to Karsavin's many-sided but not total critique. There is an intriguing similarity between progressivism, in particular in its theological version, as distinguished from one assuming an unending progress, and Karsavin's metaphysics of all unity and related historiography. Metaphysics of all unity, just like progressivism, conceives the history of creation as a path toward the right, the desired and the inevitable. The same pertains to the related historiography, even though the model of evolution is not so linear. Progressivism, explains Karsavin, is not so much false as it is an incomplete and deformed truth, an impoverished all unity, as everything existing empirically. A metaphysically justified claim that history loses meaning when it is not heading towards an ideal echoes in progressivism. The mistake of progressivism rests in the immanentization of the idea. Accordingly, progressivism, even though it dangerously misses the truth, remains close enough to this claim, and hence will never be banished from our thinking. The pantheistic historiography of Karsavin is meant to be obviously the proper approach to the relation between history and the ideal that endows it with meaning. The aim of history is here transferred beyond the historical plane. It is the absolute, with which humanity will unite in the moment of final theosis. Theosis is not going to happen until humanity achieves on the historical plane the limits of its possible fulfillment. This moment is rather distant, since many subjects haven't actualized even a tiny fracture of their potential. We have said that Karsavin's historiography helps make a diagnosis of the historiographical consciousness of contemporary culture. On the one hand, one finds their ideas that should be included in such a diagnosis. On the other, an apt juxtaposition of Karsavin's philosophy with contemporary culture sheds light on certain key features of the latter. The main, but not the only target of the Russian thinker's attack is progressivism. Other than that, he also questions the legitimacy of the cyclical theories, which tend to engender some sort of catastrophes. Karsavin tries to go beyond the opposition of the two aforementioned views and offer a third one. As such, his program is particularly valid today, because even if philosophy of history has lost importance and vitality, its ruins still cast a shadow on our reality, the darkest of which are the shadows of Spenglerism and progressivism. A short reflection upon basic political divisions in the West is enough to make it clear. While both neoliberalism and its left-wing emancipatory critics have usually operated within, or at least referred to, a progressivist paradigm, anti-establishment traditionalists have often assumed as their point of reference the cyclical catastrophic model. Behind the rhetoric of the war of civilization and struggle against external enemies, be it Islam, Russia, China, etc., there is both fear and the view of the world as a multiplicity of conflicting cultures. By no means are these the only places marked by the presence of those partly discredited but still vital models, yet they are the most obvious. The proposed by Karsavin new perspective on history overcomes quite effectively the limitations of both models of history that have been dominant in our culture for some time. However, it cannot stand without the support of an almost vertiginous metaphysics. This should help us realize how unlikely it is to undermine effectively the hegemony of the two models, no matter how elusive and harmful they may be. A historiographical model, disconnected from its metaphysical foundation, may go on living for a long time, also in an era when metaphysics is commonly rejected. It is doubtful, however, whether in such an anti-metaphysical era a new perspective, which also requires this sort of foundation, might compete successfully with the already existing models that organize our thought. While the specters of catastrophism and progressivism will probably not disappear anytime soon, we should learn to ignore them as long as we cannot dispel them.
So the floor goes directly, immediately to Aleksandra Berdnikova, and the title is The Middle Ages and the Crisis of Western Culture, Karsavin, Berdnikova, and Spengler. So, thank you. Continue with that.
Thank you very much, but I should say that my speech today will be quite different from this topic indicated in the program of our conference. And to explain what I mean, I must tell you how I came to this topic in the first place. And I came across Spengler and Karsavin as philosophers of culture when I was writing commentaries on the 6th volume of the complete works of Simon Frank, which is now being published in Russia and Moscow by the publishing house of the St. Tikhon's Orthodox University of the Humanities. And more precisely, I commented on Frank's article, The Crisis of Western Culture. This article was written by Frank for the collection Also at Spengler and the Decline of Europe, which was published in 1922 in Moscow by the publishing house Derek, and to which, alongside Frank, contributed also Yakov Pukspan, Nikolai Berdyaev, and Fyodor Stepin. And it is interesting because this collection of works, Oswald Spengler and the Decline of Europe, came out after the publishing of the first volume of Oswald Spengler's major work, The Decline of the West, and before the publishing of the second volume of this work, which we can say about their response, the massive response which provoked this work along the Russian thinkers of this time. And in his article, I'm sorry, I forgot completely this thing. I don't know if it It fits me here.
You can just put it on the table.
Oh, okay. Works. Works like this.
Yes, yes.
Works well. Well. Okay. And in his article, which I mentioned before, Frank criticized Spengler primarily for his morphological approach to culture, according to which culture is seen more as a living organism, which ages, dies according to its own laws. And secondly, Frank criticized Spengler for the fact that he sets himself the task of overcoming the classical German historicism of Herder, Humboldt, and others, and thus eliminates the subject from the historical process. And history becomes subjectless within the framework of the morphological concept of Spengler. And this position seems to Frank quietly unstable. In this Spengler's position, Frank explains, it is unresolved, remains unresolved the difference between external and internal approaches to history. And Spengler's plan aims, in a sense, to overcome the external historicism so popular in the times of Frank and Spengler as a meaningless immersion of consciousness in the chaos of pure variability, and even as a sort of a cult of that variability, and to overcome it by revealing the symbolic eternal meaning of history. But this plan is thwarted by Spengler's already indicated historical relativism, which is the food of the old external approach to history. And Spengler basically only has the substrate of history, the inner matter of history, so to speak, in the person of that primordial soul in whose womb the souls of civilization are hidden and from which they emerge, but there is no inner carrier, the subject of history, no concept that would correspond, for example, to Hegel's concept of the world spirit. And without this, or similar concept of the subject of history, the truly objective historical understanding, the universal orientation in history that Spengler strives for is completely impossible and unattainable, says Frank. Verse mentioned also the opposite position, which was held, for example, by Georg Simmel, according to whom the first volume of The Decline of the West of Spengler was the most important philosophy of history since Hegel, just to mention. And similar criticism of Spengler's concept of history was also voiced by Nikolai Berdyaev in his article The Dying Souls of Faust, from the same collection of works, with the difference that Spengler's main omission, according to Berdyaev, is that he builds his concept outside the context of the Christian religion. And according to Berdyaev, Christianity made the philosophy of history possible in the first place by revealing the existence of a single humanity with a single historical destiny, which has its own beginning and its own end. Thus, for the first time, the tragedy of world history, the fate of humanity, is revealed to the Christian consciousness. And Spengler returns to pagan particularism. And for him, there is no humanity, no world history. Cultures and races are closed monads with a closed destiny. For him, the different types of culture experience the cycle of their destiny. He returns to Hellenic view, which was overcome by the Christian consciousness. It was as if he waters of baptism and flowed out of Spengler. He denies his Christian blood. And for him, as for Helen, there is no historical distance. There is some kind of historical distance only if their historical destiny of humanity, world history, of every kind of culture is only a moment of universal destiny, says Berdyaev. And Frank is quite agree with Berdyaev in this regard. And criticized Spengler also for not mentioning Christianity in his morphological scheme, which Spengler does, but in the second volume of his work, The Decline of the West. But anyway, also coming back to Berdyaev, he says that Spengler's concept has a strong morphological character, and in this regard, Spengler tries to build his philosophy of history outside the framework of Christian consciousness. And he says that the Faustian soul divides the concept of Spengler, this soul of culture. The Faustian soul of culture divides the period of the historical progress, historical evolution, which is which, if we can say that this scheme of the antiquity, Middle Ages, Renaissance, which is the scheme of the classical historicism, Spengler divides this scheme in the separate spheres of culture. For example, the Faustian soul of culture is the thing of the Renaissance culture, and the Middle Ages he describes as the magical culture, magical kind of culture, if not saying this into many details. And what does Frank offer instead, criticizing Spengler's concept? He says that most of all, Spengler's concept of Western culture is completely original. It doesn't coincide either with the generally accepted broad concept of a culture growing on the ruins of antiquity, absorbing its spirit together with the spirit of Christianity and encompassing the entire period from the fall of antiquity to the present day, or with the narrower concept of new Western culture based on the overcoming of the Middle Ages and emerging historically from the great intellectual movements of the Renaissance and the Reformation. Instead of these two concepts, Spengler drafts his own concept of Faustian culture, which on the one hand encompasses the later Middle Ages and the modern history as a single inseparable whole, and on the other hand excludes the entire first millennium of the Christian era. And this concept is raised precisely to the meaning of a closed, self-sufficient, integral organism, which has a single, precisely Faustian soul, lives a single life, and in our days is approaching death as a whole in the form of civilization. And it is not necessary to re-establish the terms Middle Ages and modern times, which have long since fallen into discourse in historiography, in order to at least notice the excessive absoluteness and simplicity of Spengler's concept. The very fact that that Spengler's Christianity proves to be completely absent in the role of culture determining factor is mechanically divided into two parts, as they had nothing in common with each other in the inner spiritual sense, namely magical and Faustian Christianity, which I mentioned above, speaks against his concept. And the concept of Faustian culture takes a very unclear character in this respect. Frank says that he can fully agree with that this Faustian spirit, in a certain sense, defines the new European culture, starting with the Renaissance. But it still it remains unclear for him how how we can describe this Faustian soul of culture without turning into the Christian discourse, without mentioning the Christianity as important characteristics of the historical process. And here is the place where, when Lev Karsavin appears in Frank's discourse for the first time, it is his concept that Frank contrasts with Spengler's morphology. And it is interesting that Frank says that we can be fully agree with Karsavin's point of view, and criticizing Spengler, we can take Karsavin's opinion as a crucial point of his critics, as an example which works against the Spengler's morphologism of history. And it is interesting that Karsavin himself polemicized against Spengler's concept of culture of history and criticized it, especially in his work Philosophy of History, published a little bit later in 1923. And he criticized Spengler because Spengler divided the subject of history into isolated cultures, as criticizes it also Frank and Berdyaev. It was a common point in their critics. And Karsavin saw in Spengler's concept a latent recognition of a law of development common to all cultures, and the existence of this law, in his opinion, should lead to the identification of a single subject of history. And according to Karsavin, Spengler's main factual error was that he presented history not as a single dialectical process, but as a series of developmental processes of individual cultures isolated from each other. And according to Karsavin, the idea of history itself is impossible without the idea of single subject of history. In this respect, this position of Karsavin echoes with the position of Frank, that Spengler lacks the concept of the subject of history, which could correspond to Hegel's concept of the world spirit. And Karsavin says, with the recognition of humanity as a subject of historical development, at least at first sight, a very widespread sociologism seems to be improbable. They claim that there is a law of development that is invariably expressed in the lives of all peoples or some other historical individuals, for example, cultures, the same classes, etc. In this respect, historical individuals are considered unconnected, or at least their interaction is recognized as a secondary and insignificant phenomenon. Recently, this disunity of historical subject has been defended with particularly by Spengler, facilitated by the fact that for him the subject of development is always not the people whose communication with its neighbors is difficult to deny, but culture. And also he says that Spengler is a very significant and not at all accidental contradiction, claims that cultures are absolutely alien, even incomprehensible to each other in their essence, and at the same time recognize them as the product of one and the same primordial soul. And the primordial soul, which he understands as the potency of everything that was, is, and will be, is realized consistently and simultaneously in a specific cultural souls. And each of them implements a law of development common to all. Thus, Spengler has both the unity of substance, the origin of everything from one soul, and the unity of the form of development, which of course can only be separated from the content to a limited extent, and the irreducibility to the qualities to one another. And for coming to the conclusion of my intervent of today, briefly which conclusion we can make. The conceptions of Spengler and Karsavin were the difference between them, their interactions, the reception of Spengler's soul in Karsavin's concept, the critics of the Spengler's ideas gave generally in the Russian philosophy of that period. All of these themes have become many times the subjects of many researches. For example, I have one here, but anyway, doesn't matter for not making this discourse more difficult. As for me, the interesting point here can be this concept of Middle Ages as the main topic, main theme, because Karsavin, when analyzing this concept of culture, takes as a basis of his analysis the Middle Ages, the epoch of Middle Ages. For him, as it was said before by our speakers in this conference, in particular Italian Middle Ages. For him, it's very important. Spengler, in turn, divides this epoch of Middle Ages by the magical culture and the Faustian soul, which is strictly which was criticized by all of the Russian thinkers. Berdyaev, in turn, in 1924, writes his pretty famous work, New Middle Ages, when he takes this concept and looks at it from the point of view of the times of the actual events for him for his epoch of the beginning of the 20th century. And for me, it's quite interesting to observe these interactions and to trace all the points of this reception and critiques and points of view, because as for me, it's quite. It can be a characteristics for the epoch of the beginning of the 20th century, and not only, but it's a very, very interesting point. As for me, that's all.
Thank you. So we have a short time for questions now, maybe, and then we go to the presentation of the pictures. Please.
One question to Aleksandra. You spoke about, you discussed about at the beginning about Frank and his critique of Spengler and concerning the concept of death, organic death. What do you mean by the death in this sense? Because Spengler, as you remember, he used the concept of Untergang, or which was translated like, for example, decline, but can be downfall, even sunset, Mm-hmm. It's not about death, and he spoke not about nations, but about some morphological organizations. It means Faustian, for instance, or magical, which you mentioned before. What does mean the death in this sense, which you mentioned at the beginning?
Cultures.
But what does mean death?
It's the end of any culture which
you mean
came
just
after
the end?
The end of any culture which is the form of civilization, which the thing that come after the form of civilization. Because as for Spengler, but I might be wrong.
No, because that's
after civilization, the culture doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, this is why I asked, because before we discussed about the concept of death in Karsavin's, that's writings, the poem about death. and that the concept of death has completely different significance than, for example, decline. It's not the same in Russian as well. Decline and death are two completely different concepts.
Yeah.
Upadek и смерть, decline, this is completely different. And this is why I am asking, because
Yes.
it's not only you discuss the death of cultures. There are many articles about it, but it's not clear for me why they use the concept of death instead of decline.
Yes, because it's the main point, one of the main point of the critics of Frank Berdyaev, all the Russian thinkers, Karsavin, Frank Berdyaev, Spenger's ideas. Because for them, and we can see this also in the new Middle Ages of Berdyaev, the culture cannot die. It can survive the decline, and this decline of any culture can only make it stronger than it was before. Only any kind of difficulty that afford the culture in the process in the historical process of its development can only make it stronger, because for all these thinkers there were such historical events as the Russian Revolution, emigration, religious crisis, etc., etc., etc. The First World War, and many others. As for them, all these things can only make it stronger, and make more unite the culture, the nation, the people, and can be the source of inspiration to unite across the church, across the religion, the God, and all of these ideas, and move further. As for Spengler, but Spengler speaks not about these historical difficulties. He speaks about the process of evolution of any culture and the stage of civilization. There is nothing after. Thus, only any culture dies after once it becomes civilization. Then it dies. There is no other way, and is coming the other culture, but as a separate monad, which has this new culture has nothing in common with this old civilization which has died before. Don't know if I answered correctly, but
Because I interpret this as the final of my.
For Spengler, it is this. For the Russian thinkers, it's decline.
He speaks, on my opinion, about the decline of forms, not
Yes.
cultures, but forms of cultures. I mean,
Yes.
morphology, forms.
Yes.
It means a little bit different. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We could discuss later and over lunch maybe. Are there other questions?
Я посмотрела, что другим дать слова. Простите, на русском буду, потому что я знаю, что вы понимаете. Уважаемый профессор Мазурек, я благодарю вас за доклад. И я внимательно очень посмотрела, в частности, ваш абстракт. И задаю вам вопрос, который меня волнует, и который я хотела к предыдущим задать вопросам. Сейчас, вот на нашей конференции, и думаю, не только до этого, и после этого будут звучать два слова, два понятия: Восток и Запад. И вы, в частности, тоже отмечали, что история Софьи Karsavina, она в своем роде уникальна, и уникальный синтез и с точки зрения восточная русская философия и с точки зрения Запада. И концепция истории, и концепция символической личности. Вот такой уникальная личность. В связи с этим у меня такой вопрос. Скажите, пожалуйста, в каком контексте вы понимаете понятие «Восток» и «Запад»? Вот является ли Россия Востоком? Или все-таки евразийцы правы, когда говорили, это уникальное? Может быть, благодаря тому, что они евразийцы, они и могут соединять, в частности, у Льва, у Франка, у Семена Франка, непостижимо. Тоже уникальный синтез мистики и рационального. Я была просто поражена, когда читала. Вот, может быть, это особенность русского менталитета, который сейчас в политической ситуации негатирует, и является одной из причин вот таких уникальных самобытных анализов. Я не абсолютизирую, а я анализирую причины возникновения. Будьте так любезны, заранее благодарна за ответ.
Хорошо, отвечать буду также на русском языке.
Конечно.
На том языке, на котором вы поставили вопрос. Если я вас хорошо понял, вы хотите, чтобы я определил, в каком смысле Россия это Восток. У меня есть собственный ответ на этот вопрос, который я всегда защищаю. Но это ответ, который мы не найдем у Карсавина. Я нахожу этот ответ у другого философа истории, великого философа истории, который во многом находится в противоречии с Карсавином, имею в виду Арнольда Тойнби. Но прежде чем я расскажу о том, как отвечает на этот вопрос про Россию как Восток Тойнби, я хочу еще сказать что-то о Карсавине. Карсавин представляет, с Карсавином есть много трудностей. Между прочим, потому что у него есть разные, скажем, такие этажи его творчества. Есть Карсавин, не только Карсавин писатель, Карсавин поэт, Карсавин историк и Карсавин философ, но также Карсавин идеолог, евразийский идеолог. И как относится это, я не совсем уверен, что возможно все эти этажи согласовать с собой. В какой степени Карсавин как идеолог евразийства, универсалист, для меня на этот вопрос мне трудно рассказать. Мне кажется, что евразийство не было универсализма. Но Карсавин как философ истории, наверное, универсалист, прекрасный универсалист. Может быть, здесь есть противоречие между Карсавином идеологом и Карсавином философом истории. Для меня, прежде всего, интересен Карсавин как философ истории и представитель универсализма. Здесь есть трудности, потому что в этом универсализме всегда, когда мы имеем дело с универсализмом, возникает вопрос про персонализм и имперсонализм. Кажется, что Карсавин это также защитник крайнего персонализма. Но, например, Бердяев бы его упрекал в имперсонализме, потому что персонализм Карсавина имеет характер иерархический. Бердяев считал, что иерархический персонализм это не настоящий персонализм. Сам Бердяев написал одну книгу в таком духе иерархического персонализма, это была философия неравенства, но он потом от ней всю жизнь отказывался. Так что, может быть, нет полного согласия между Карсавиным идеологом и Карсавином философом истории. Это вопрос, на который надо еще ответить. Что касается России как Востока, по-моему, самый интересный ответ на этот вопрос дал Арнольд Тойнби, когда он сказал, что Европа, Западная Европа, Запад и Россия – это две разных цивилизации, но это цивилизации сестры. В том смысле, что у них есть совместный, что они происходят от одной античной цивилизации. Отношения между этими цивилизациями, между такими цивилизациями очень сложны и очень нестабильны. Я об этом писал, между прочим, в некоторых статьях. И почему эти отношения сложны? Потому что здесь есть возможность коммуникации, но здесь есть два разных идентитета. Есть общество коммуникационное, можно сказать, но нет общего идентитета. И поэтому очень просто считать разницу, считать разницу идентитета как деформацию своего собственного идентитета. Между близкими цивилизациями всегда существует такой риск, что разница будет воспринята как деформация нашего собственного идентитета. Я так отвечал на ваш вопрос про то, в каком смысле Россия, какие отношения между Россией как Востоком и Европой. У меня, если были бы заметки, я бы еще мог сказать что-то о Шпенглере и Карсавине, но не знаю, есть ли еще у нас время.
Ну, смотрю Терезу, потому что это, поскольку у нас...
Времени нет, я вижу, что время
В
кончилось.
принципе, мы перенесли дискуссию на сейчас, а потом будет презентация, поэтому...
А тогда у нас есть еще время.
Есть время.
Есть еще время, пожалуйста.
Еще могу сказать, что...
Наоборот, много.
Да, потому что можно тогда поставить...
Мне кажется, что когда мы рассматриваем отношения между историей Шпенглера и Карсавина, надо помнить, что здесь есть такие терминологические ловушки. Во-первых, слово «культура» на языке Шпенглера, в терминологии Шпенглера имеет несколько значений. Во-первых, культура в более широком смысле – это культура и цивилизация. То есть западная культура, есть арабская культура, была античная культура. Это культура, это у Шпенглера название исторического субъекта, который нам рождается, развивается, умирает. Во-вторых, культура – это одна из стадий развития этого субъекта. Это культура в более узком смысле. Здесь уже возникают недоразумения. Что касается смерти в философии истории Шпенглера, Шпенглер имеет право говорить о смерти культуры, потому что у него есть органическая, биологическая параллель. Культуру сравнивается за организмом, биологическим организмом. Биологический организм умирает, поэтому можно говорить о смерти. В каком смысле культура умирает? Об этом очень хорошо пишет Степун в эссе, помещенном в этой книжке 4 авторов, 3 известных философов и 4-го загадочного Букшпана. Здесь он пишет, здесь он цитирует отрывки из произведения Шпенглера, в которых Шпенглер пишет так: в будущем наши самые красивые произведения нашего искусства, нашей музыки, для людей будущего они будут абсолютно непонятны. Абсолютно непонятны. Например, музыка, произведения Моцарта или Рамо, они будут для людей будущего абсолютно непонятны. Ничего они из этих произведений не поймут. Смерть культуры обозначает, что эта культура становится для будущего совсем непонятной. Так, мне кажется, можно объяснить понятие смерти у Шпенглера. Конечно, у Шпенглера смерть не является, по-моему, никаким моментом развития.
Are there other questions? Вопросы еще? Harry.
I can ask in English.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Maybe you could explain, does Karsavin think that this hierarchical structure of the persons, does this mean like the objective non-human world as well? So he thinks there is somehow personality in the world of objects, you know, the material world. And if that's the case, you know, how does he solve the sort of difficulties that worldview contains? Yeah.
I think that for Spengler, you are asking about Karsavin. So,
Yes.
if I understand Karsavin correctly, objects, that for instance, products of humans, are expressions of collective persons, but they don't have personal, but they aren't personal beings. But there is hierarchy of different individual and collective persons. For instance, a tribe is a family, is a collective person, a symphonic person. Then a tribe is a collective person, a nation is a collective person. Civilization, which includes many nations, are also symphonic or collective persons. These collective persons can somehow lose its personal character. It happens that they are losing its personal characters, and then they are objectified. If they are able to regain this personal character, I cannot answer now. I'm not sure if I know. But they can lose this character, and the example of a collective person which lost its personal character, it was, as I mentioned in my paper for Karsavin, working class. As far as it appropriates Marxist ideology, the medieval workers were also collective persons. They had their own culture, their collective life. They weren't reduced only to material aims. According to Karsavin, contemporary working class, which is absolutely focused only on its material well-being and fighting for its well-being, and doesn't have its own culture, or for instance own religious life, was reduced and objectified. And this would be a case of a person who to some extent lost its personal character.
And what about like the natural world? Does this have personality as well? You know, nature and organism.
Nature, I see the natural world. I don't remember if Karsavin answered this question, if he ruminates this problem. But he is concentrated on culture, on history, on human activity and human communities. You know, this problem, for instance, of personality, for instance, of animals in his philosophy. Rather, no. A Russian philosopher who goes in this direction was Berdyaev. Wrote about Bulgakov. They rather stress the personal character of natural world. Perhaps I'm wrong, but my impression is, it's also a question to discuss, that there is no cosmism in Karsavin. Maybe someone thinks another about it, but in my opinion, my intuition is that there is no cosmic tendency cosmic tendency in the Karsavin, like it was in Bulgakov.
That's a very interesting topic because, as we know, cosmism tend to be an overflowing kind of paradigm, and so it's again about a question of definition. Are there any other questions?
Я Александр.
Okay, пожалуйста.
Спасибо большое, Александра, за очень интересный доклад. И мне кажется, очень актуальная сама тема Средневековья. Казалось, вопрос, как может быть актуальная тема Средневековья в 21 веке. Но сегодня во всем мире почему-то очень часто звучат слова варварство, орда и так далее, понятия, которые были характерны не для высокого Средневековья, а для вот того понимания, которое мы вкладываем, когда говорим о Средневековье. Вопрос заключается в следующем. Если можно, повторяя опять-таки, большой жизненный опыт показывает, что это действительно так, мы не случайно на что-то обращаем внимание. Вам захотят подготовить доклад именно на эту тему, а в конце вашего абстракта еще упоминается слово работа Бердяева «Новое Средневековье», написано в 1924 году. А я символикой занимаюсь и хватаю вот так вот цифры. А сейчас 2024 год. Нельзя ли сегодняшний день где-то как-то в каких-то а мы философы, мы смотрим со всех сторон, называть тоже новым Средневековьем. Может быть, Бердяев бы сейчас был, еще интереснее работу написал. Спасибо за ответ.
Спасибо большое вам за реплику. И мне кажется, здесь она как бы является такой самостоятельной и не нуждается в моем ответе, потому что прежде всего это не Карсавин, это скорее к краковским встречам, которые будут в июне по Бердяеву как раз. Вот. Ну, а вообще, если посмотреть на реакцию, которая возникла именно в Европе по поводу... Я отвечаю на русском, потому что вопрос был задан на русском, как и предыдущий оратор. Вот. На реакцию, которая была в литературе, в культуре, вообще во всех сферах, можно назвать, я не знаю, Олдоса Хаксли «Дивный новый мир», у которого эпиграф из нового Средневековья Бердяева. Можно также назвать работу Умберто Эко, опять же, о новом Средневековье, где он упоминает этот концепт, но не ссылается на Бердяева. Вот. Также можно обратиться ко многим культурологам, философам, мыслителям, литераторам именно 20 века, поскольку рецепция Бердяева именно этой работы была беспрецедентной. Вот, среди остальных русских мыслителей именно Бердяев именно на Западе стал очень популярным после выхода этого достаточно маленького эссе «Новое Средневековье», что уже говорит об его актуальности. И вот в настоящее время я встречала лично рефлексии по поводу как раз-таки нового Средневековья Бердяева в связи с пандемией COVID-19. Вот. То есть возврат, опять же, к этому же дискурсу. В связи с настоящими событиями между Россией и Украиной, вот, военным вторжением, я не видела пока еще. Возможно, они есть, но мне не встречались. Вот. Но так что примеров, мне кажется, достаточно, и рефлексий над ними. В общем, Бердяев как никогда актуален. Но не будем как бы забирать сейчас внимание у Карсавина, поскольку нашим предметом является он, чтобы не вызвать ревность и так далее. Спасибо.
Тем более, что следующие встречи в Кракове будут как раз про Бердяева. Вопросы? Пожалуйста.
Someone touches on Karsavin's cosmism, so I would like to comment on this point. Of course, Karsavin is not cosmist, but he has no cosmistic philosophy. But he has his philosophy has a cosmic characteristics, I think. His philosophy of personality, personhood, include, of course, animals and natural world. So, yeah, I don't like. Yeah, I think it includes cosmic tendency, but yeah, it's not cosmism. And at the center of Karsavin's philosophy of personhood, of course, stands humanity. And yeah, so his philosophy, I think, is constituted on the basis of humanity, but it also includes cosmic character.
Yeah, thank you for the specification about the meaning. Any reply?
I have said about it.
Yeah, you said before, so, okay, so if we're okay with that, we thank our panelists today now. Thank you so much. And I think now we go to the presentation, and I'm sorry that we switched the discussion before the presentation, so you had to wait. But I think it worked better in terms of the discussion coming immediately after the papers.
Now there is a presentation dedicated to Karsavin's presence in
Yeah, and now this is the presentation with the pictures,
by
right?
Tomasz Herbich.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Where can I put some pictures to put into show?
Yeah. So I think we should move back so that I can see.